Black History Month 2021, full of some hard conversations. Our country is dealing with civil unrest, racial tension, political divides, and teachers in our nation's schools are talking to some pretty young kids about these tough topics. NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce shows us who's figuring out that curriculum and how it changes from state to state.
From the Tulsa Massacre to Juneteenth, there's so much Black history many of us never learned in school. So who decides how history is taught today? And with racism under a microscope, how much detail are teachers allowed to show? It's really up to the states.
The State Board of Education is considering a hotly debated topic that would impact what your kids learn in school.
Recently, in North Carolina, a committee of social studies educators proposed that the terms systemic racism, systemic discrimination, and gender identity should be included in the state's curriculum standards.
We're going to be talking about the Wilmington insurrection.
8th grade social studies teacher Rodney Pierce helped draft the more progressive language.
We have to teach our children the truth of our country. Have we made great strides? Yes, we have. But if we're being candid and we're being honest, we have so much further to go.
Republican lawmakers like Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson spoke out against the changes.
It is a requirement, actually, for us to teach our students about all the terrible things that have happened in this country. But I think also what we need to teach is this. Our system of government, the American system of government, is what made it possible for us to overcome those things.
We offered Lieutenant Governor Robinson and the state superintendent an opportunity to share their perspective, but we didn't hear back. In the end, they won. The broader systemic language was rejected. The state did update the curriculum to focus more on the experience of marginalized groups and their contributions. Curriculum standards are just one piece of the puzzle. When it comes to textbooks, historians like Dr. Dana Ramey Berry say it's only within the past 20 to 30 years that schools have really begun to correct overtly racist narratives in teaching materials. Some omissions are still hidden in plain sight.
A number of textbooks are not really looking at the complexities of the African American experience. So what happens is Black people show up not until after the American Revolution. They show up as enslaved only.
In this elementary school social studies textbook, the first time we see a Black person is a slave, and it's not until page 104 out of 400 or so. The caption reads, "The workers on plantations were usually slaves or indentured servants." We reached out to the publisher, TCI, and didn't hear back. According to the Texas Education Agency, 15 school districts in the state bought this material sometime since 2015 and may still be using it.
I think it's dangerous because it puts Black people as second-class citizens, literally, from the moment that they appear in knowledge for young children.
Our stories are so much more than just shackles and segregation. So what are some of those moments of Black joy, of triumph, of contributions that we need to be talking about here as well?
I would love for every high school student to leave high school knowing that the African American experience was complex. It was diverse. It included freedom. It included slavery. It included the fight for justice and for rights.
A growing number of states are listening and making changes.
Monday night, the board decided that the district will adopt a cultural curriculum called Black History 365.
Public schools in Peoria, Illinois, plan to incorporate Black history year-round.
It'll be taught in schools now. It'll be memorialized.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis recently signed a bill requiring state schools to teach the often overlooked 1920 Ocoee Massacre.
What is taught in African American ethnic studies is a truth that simply serves to educate students on their path.
And in 2020, the Texas State Board unanimously voted to offer students an African American studies elective. Teachers are also filling in the gaps on their own. About 4,000 teachers reported using the 1619 Project in lesson plans. That's a New York Times initiative that has become controversial in conservative circles over the way it depicts slavery as integral to the founding of America. My man. Rodney Pierce tends to lean into historical archives and the canon of Black intellectuals like James Baldwin.
You'll also try to tie it into the Black Lives Matter movement.
But that's led to confrontation with a powerful group of stakeholders, parents.
And I spoke with the parent, and I was told that, we don't support Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. my credentials were questioned. I was very offended and I was upset. I've had a couple of incidents like that.
After a turbulent year that's changed just about everything in our lives, the way we learn about our country's history is changing too.
Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You are watching NBC News Now. 3 big developments in our country's fight against the coronavirus. President Biden is in Texas today, visiting a federal vaccine super site at the Houston Texans home stadium. He'll talk about the government's vaccine push while he's there. The FDA about to add a 3rd weapon to our nation's arsenal. A panel meeting today voting on emergency use for Johnson & Johnson's single-dose vaccine. It could be ready to roll out in a matter of days.
Like many of you, I'm excited about news that another safe and effective vaccine option could be coming as quickly as next week. Having an additional safe and effective vaccine will help protect more people faster.
And the House voting on President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan tonight. That bill includes the $15 minimum wage, setting up a showdown in the Senate after the parliamentarian ruled that hike can't be included. We'll start with President Biden's visit to the Lone Star State. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli is covering the Biden administration from Washington, D.C. And NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber is at Energy Park in Houston, where the president is visiting today. Mike, we'll start with you. Biden speaking at the FEMA COVID vaccination facility in Houston. What will he address in his speech tonight?
Well, Alison, we expect those remarks to be about 15 minutes long, and I assume for White House officials, we can expect that he'll address what he had talked about yesterday at a White House event when we saw him actually witness 4 vaccinations, bringing us to half a million, getting close to his 100 million goal of vaccinations within his first 100 days. Now, what did we hear from President Biden yesterday, and something he'll repeat again today? For all the progress that they've made and visiting this mass vaccination site, he'll call attention to some of the work the administration has done to get us to this point, partnering with these sports complexes in order to get as many vaccines into arms as possible. There's still a lot of work still to be done, and it's not a time to be complacent. And so certainly we'll use that as, whether explicitly or implicitly, an opportunity to pitch yet again his $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan, of course, which is facing a critical test in Congress just this weekend, Allison.
Mike, the president also touring the damage from the winter storm, spending most of the day with Republican Governor Greg Abbott. Do we know how they got along and what additional help the White House might be offering?
Yeah, there was an interesting moment as the president stood alongside Governor Abbott as they visited a response center in Houston, where the governor talked about how eager, in fact, the president was to get down to Houston. Said when he proposed to him during a phone conversation visiting that particular center, he accepted. He said yes before I even finished the sentence. And so all signs are, at least publicly, that these two are getting along, but very clear political differences. And it's interesting to see Biden so quickly embracing the Republican governor, doing his best to show, as he and the White House have put it, there's no such thing as a red state or a blue state when it comes to disaster relief. And Dr. Liz Sherwood-Randall, she's a deputy national security advisor, talked today a bit about some of the additional relief that is going to be coming. They've already provided 2 million meals through FEMA, 2 million gallons of water, 100,000 gallons of fuel, and they've expanded their disaster declaration to cover now 126 counties in the state of Texas. In the short term, Sherwood-Randall said that their focus continues to be on the immediate needs of those who need power, who need water, who need sort of immediate assistance. But over the long term, there is going to be a conversation about resiliency in our energy grid and addressing climate change as we continue to see these kinds of weather events that are anomalies, for sure.
Ellison, you have been in Texas all week long reporting on the state's recovery, the storm delaying vaccine distribution. How are things there now?
So they say things are mostly back on track. Obviously, there were shipments that did not make it here during the storm. But this week on Monday and Wednesday, primarily Texas, health officials say they received about 1.5 million doses of vaccines. They were supposed to get 1 million allocated this week. So that number also includes allocations of doses that were coming for federal sites and perhaps most importantly, in terms of the question you are asking, doses that did not make it because they were delayed for the winter storm. So they say in regards to that, things are back on track in terms of the amount they were expecting to have. They have all of it now. Last week, the ones that they didn't get, as well as what they were supposed to be getting this week. And then they are expecting 1 million doses allocation to come next week as well. I mean, we were at the other side of where I'm standing now, where the entrance to the FEMA run site here in Houston is, and we just watched car after car come in to get a vaccine at this federally supported vaccination site. They are trying to vaccinate 6,000 people a day, and they're going to do that for the next 3 weeks. Allison?
Yeah, Ellison, the video of those cars pulling in, very impressive. Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo says they need 9 million doses to reach herd immunity in the region. What kind of dent are they expecting that vaccine site in Houston to make in terms of that number?
So as of this morning, if I have my numbers correct, a reporter doing numbers, I feel like is always risky, but we're going to try it and see if I can remember. So as of this morning, the state of Texas, about I appreciate the confidence. 3.4 million Texans, as of this morning, had already received dose one of the available COVID-19 vaccines. About 1.4 million Texans have gotten the second dose as well. So that means around 5.8% of Texans are vaccinated as of today. So when you're looking at that 9 million number that she gave, they've got a ways to go. But what we are told is that the expectation of the federally run FEMA site here in Houston, which is the largest in the state of Texas, is that over the next 3 weeks, they're going to have close to 150,000 people vaccinated here. So that's the biggest site. Still a ways to go, though, I think, to get to that 9 million. Allison?
Yeah, for sure. But progress nonetheless. Mike, a question about COVID relief. The White House saying they are disappointed that the Senate parliamentarian ruled against minimum wage in the COVID relief bill. But what's the administration saying they'll do now?
Well, Allison, it's so interesting, and it may sound counterintuitive, but the fact that the parliamentarian ruled the way she did, that this minimum wage increase can't be part of the bill, may actually have been good news for passage of this final package, given that there were certain Democrats who had not yet lined up in support of this minimum wage increase. It might have actually provided a real political complication for the White House. So, yes, this was, to a lot of Democrats, though, the best chance they thought they had of getting this minimum wage increase approved. We did hear from the White House that even with this setback, such as it was, they will intend to fight for this going forward. Take a listen to what Brian Deese, one of the top White House economic advisors, said on Morning Joe earlier today.
The president is still committed to getting a $15 minimum wage?
Absolutely. The president has campaigned on the $15 minimum wage. He believes in the $15 minimum wage. He's committed to getting it done.
So he's committed to getting it done, but as progressives point out, they aren't necessarily endorsing some of the tactics that might be used in order to get that done. One thing that progressives have proposed would be to have the vice president, Kamala Harris, who is the president of the Senate, overrule the parliamentarian, but that would require 50 votes among the Democratic caucus, unlikely to happen. The other thing is that some Democrats are calling for the abolition of the filibuster so that eventually this could be passed by 50 votes, regardless of the current filibuster rules. What a White House official said today was that the president at this stage still has not reconsidered his own position, which is that the filibuster for now should stay in place.
Mike, before you go, you're reporting on new guidelines for people applying for White House jobs who've used marijuana. What's changing there?
Yeah, this is such an interesting story because in order to work in what's called the executive office of the president, that's the White House grounds, includes up to 500 employees, you have to be deemed as eligible for a security clearance. And the applications for security clearances ask a lot of questions about your past drug use. And during the transition period, as they were getting these applications, especially from campaign staffers who wanted to move into the White House, they realized they were in a difficult position because if their staff was being honest, a lot were disclosing the fact that they had used marijuana. Now, we'll remind it, 15 states and here in Washington, the District of Columbia, cannabis is, for all purposes, legal for adults, but it's still a federal crime. And so this was going to be an issue for a lot of staff in order to get their security clearances. What the White House announced today was that if you disclosed that you had a limited use of marijuana in your recent past, that you could apply for a waiver. It means you wouldn't necessarily be able to work in the White House itself until a certain unspecified time period expired, but you would have to promise not to consume marijuana any longer for the duration of your government service. And if all other indications of the security clearances went through, you would be allowed to work, just not in the White House just yet, Allison.
All right, Mike, thank you so much for reporting on that. Mike and Ellison, thank you both.
Thank you.
The Treasury Department announcing new sanctions and the State Department announcing visa restrictions on some Saudis under a new policy called the Khashoggi ban. The U.S. declassifying a CIA report today confirming that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the 2018 killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The Crown Prince not a part of those sanctions, though. Secretary of State Blinken explaining to NBC News they do not want to rupture U.S.-Saudi relations, but rather recalibrate it with U.S. interests and values. NBC News correspondent Ken Delanian has more.
Allison, the director of national intelligence today released a long-awaited summary of an intelligence report showing that the intelligence community believes that the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, was involved in the state-sponsored murder of a political dissident and journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, who wrote columns for the Washington Post and lived in suburban Virginia, not far from where I'm standing now. And while this assessment was reported on, including by NBC News 2 years ago, the fact of its publication today on U.S. government letterhead really sort of puts in stark relief the dilemma that the Biden administration is confronting and how to deal with this, because it's sort of a clash between American interests and American values. Biden wants to put human rights in more of a place of prominence in American foreign policy than President Trump did. Trump's response to this intelligence was to ignore it and to continue dealing with bin Salman, known as MBS. The Biden folks are taking a different approach. They're trying to marginalize Mohammed bin Salman. In fact, President Biden had a call with bin Salman's father, the king, yesterday, and pointedly did not engage with MBS. But there's no indication the U.S. is going to sanction MBS over this killing. And in terms of why the U.S. intelligence community believes that this happened, what we got was a declassified summary without any juicy bits of intelligence in it. But there's just one element of it that I wanted to read you. It said that among the members of that Saudi team that killed Jamal Khashoggi in the Istanbul consulate, remember he was lured there under false pretenses, was the prince's elite personal detail, known as the Rapid Intervention Force, which exists to defend the Crown Prince, this is the U.S. intelligence document, answers only to him and had directly participated in earlier dissident suppression operations. We judge that members of this group would not have participated in this operation against Khashoggi without Mohammed bin Salman's approval. So that's why the U.S. government is pointing the finger at the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Whether the Biden administration is going to do anything significant about this, whether this changes U.S. relations with Saudi Arabia, remains to be seen. Allison, back to you.
A new round of long-awaited COVID relief could be coming for millions of Americans. The House set to pass President Biden's first major piece of legislation, a $1.9 trillion relief package. But it's missing one major provision, the Senate ruling that a $15 minimum wage hike cannot be part of that bill. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake joining us now from the Russell Rotunda. Garrett, House Democrats voting tonight on the relief package with the minimum wage provision in it, in spite of that Senate ruling. So how do you expect this one to go?
Allison, I expect this to be mostly a party line vote. Democratic whips think they might lose one or two people. They're hopeful that they might get one or two Republican crossovers, especially now knowing that the minimum wage provision won't be in the final bill. But the reality is the House is going to have to vote on this thing again whenever the Senate gets finished, because the Senate will have to take out the minimum wage provision and make a couple of other changes. So this vote is interesting, but it won't be the last word for the House.
Garrett, the $15 minimum wage hike is a top priority for the Biden administration and progressives. So how is the progressive base reacting to that Senate parliamentarian ruling, and what are they going to do about it now?
Well, progressives are unhappy. The parliamentarian is an unelected position. It's a bureaucratic position. And the progressives in particular feel like they ran on this, they campaigned on this, they won the White House, the House, and the Senate. Everybody kind of knowing that a $15 minimum wage was going to be a key issue. And then to be turned around and told they can't do it because of Senate procedure is deeply frustrating. But the reality is this is where we are. And the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, a couple of other key Senate committee chairmen, and the Biden administration all stepped in pretty quickly and said, look, this is the ruling from the parliamentarian. They don't appear at all interested in going down the road that Republicans went down in a similar situation back in 2001 and trying to fire the parliamentarian. So they're going to take their lumps on this here and try to find another way to accomplish the same means through some other legislative tool.
Garrett, this minimum wage debate's also renewing calls to end the filibuster. Tell us more about what's going on there.
Well, this goes right into that same key issue here. You know, Democrats feeling like they have all the levers of power here, and they don't want to be stymied by an institution that is essentially a legacy of Jim Crow. It's not in the Constitution. It's designed to protect minority rights. Now, it also protected the rights of the Democratic minority when Republicans were in charge of the Senate. But for now, Democrats see the filibuster as an obstacle to progress, as an obstacle to passing the big things that they want to get done. But most of those voices are coming from the left and from the House when they're coming from elected officials. Senate Democrats are not nearly as united in the idea of getting rid of the filibuster, and it would take every single one of them and likely support from President Biden to do so. And right now, that's just not there. So until and unless there's an issue that is so overwhelmingly important to Democrats that the filibuster stops it from happening with no other recourse, I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon.
Garrett, we know some Republicans are pretty critical of the minimum wage hike provision, but there are other members of the GOP who've been floating their own proposals. What are you hearing about those plans?
It's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of Republicans who agree that the minimum wage needs to be raised in some capacity, but don't like the idea of doing it across the board at the federal level to that $15 level. There are two main Republican options that I've seen floating around. The first is from Tom Cotton and Mitt Romney that would raise the minimum wage to $10 an hour, but it would also tie it to an expansion of the use of the E-Verify system, essentially to prevent undocumented immigrants from working in the United States. The idea being to focus any minimum wage increase on American workers who they are sure are American citizens. That proposal's out there also today. Josh Hawley, remember him, floated a proposal of his own, essentially requiring billion-dollar corporations to pay at least a $15 minimum wage. His own version of kind of a populist take on this. I've not seen any other takers from the left, certainly co-sponsoring anything with Hawley. And really, I think Democrats want to try to go their own way on this. They don't seem particularly interested in either of these Republican proposals so far.
All right, Garrett, so we no longer wait for the Senate parliamentarian, but we still wait for that House vote on COVID relief. Until then, thank you so much.
There's always something to wait for up here, Allison. Have a good weekend.
You too.
2 F-15E Strike Eagles dropped 7 precision-guided munitions, totally destroying 9 facilities and partially destroying 2 facilities. We have preliminary details about casualties on site, but I won't be able to discuss additional details at this time because our battle damage assessment is ongoing.
That's Pentagon spokesman John Kirby with new details about the U.S. airstrike on Iranian-backed targets in Syria. So how did we get to this point? Here's NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel.
Allison, President Biden is trying to send a message to Iran, a clear message, an unmistakable message that it will no longer tolerate attacks by Iranian-backed militias on U.S. interests in Iraq, and that while President Biden wants to negotiate and wants to get back to the nuclear deal and wants to resume the diplomatic process, it will not accept being pressured militarily with these rocket attacks. So overnight, President Biden personally, according to the U.S. military, authorized a retaliatory strike. Over the last several weeks, there have been numerous rocket attacks against U.S. interests in Iraq. Those interests have been the Green Zone in Baghdad, where the U.S. embassy is based. Also, a U.S. base in northern Iraq, in the city of Erbil. And that attack in particular was seen as on a larger scale, crossing a line that hadn't been crossed before. So the U.S. did retaliate with this airstrike, at least 2 aircraft involved, targeting a logistics base, according to the U.S. military, on the Syrian side of the Iraqi border, a logistics base that, according to the military, was being used by the very same Iranian-backed militias that had been carrying out these attacks. But this is dangerous. The U.S. wanted to send a message. President Biden wanted to send a message of deterrence, but once you start this retaliatory action, there is always the danger that it begins a cycle of violence and a series of escalations. A year ago, a similar situation almost brought the United States and Iran to the brink of war. But times were very different then. You had President Trump, who responded very, very aggressively, killing the top Iranian general. The Iranians fired ballistic missiles at a U.S. base in Iraq. So it did escalate, and the U.S. and Iran almost went to war. This time, it seems like the Biden administration wanted to send a clear message that Iran could not miss, but is describing it as proportionate. And instead of having the president come out and describing these actions, the White House is pushing comment to the military.
Let's go to NBC News Now. Correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Simone, we cannot start our weekend without your headlines, so please usher us into our Saturday and Sunday.
Let's get to it. Allison, we're wrapping up the week with some news on the pandemic. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky says she's concerned the latest wave of COVID cases may be flattening at high levels. She also noted the data may show the beginning effects of new COVID variants spreading across the country. Well, a Texas woman has filed a class action lawsuit against Griddy, one of the state's power providers. The woman is accusing the company of price gouging during last week's snowstorm after she received, get this, a $9,500 electricity bill. Now, Griddy could not immediately be reached for comment. Well, police in Nigeria say a group of gunmen kidnapped 317 schoolgirls, the latest in a series of mass abductions in the West African nation. Authorities say search and rescue efforts are underway, and they suspect some girls were taken to a nearby forest. Well, the WNBA and NBA signed off on the sale of the Atlanta Dream, transferring ownership from former Senator Kelly Loeffler to a new group of investors. Dream players previously said they didn't agree with Loeffler's views, some even going as far as wearing Vote Warnock shirts during pregame warm-ups. And Netflix will spend $100 million on organizations that help underrepresented groups find jobs in the media business. This comes after a new study showed while Netflix made some progress in making their content more diverse, that they still have some gaps to close. Allison, that'll do it for me. I'll send it back to you.
All right, Simone, thank you so much. Have a terrific weekend.
The president is visiting a federally established community vaccination site today in Houston, Texas. This site opened yesterday and has the capacity to vaccinate 6,000 people per day. And today we're announcing 2 new federal vaccination sites, one in North Carolina and the other in Illinois. Starting in 2 weeks, the United Center in Chicago will be used to vaccinate up to 6,000 people per day. And in North Carolina, a new site in Greensboro will have the capacity to vaccinate 3,000 people per day.
As more COVID vaccines become available, the White House ramping up distribution, but this new wave of doses could really test the administration's ability to get vaccines into American arms quickly. NBCnews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece joining me now. Shannon, if the manufacturers meet their projections, the U.S. will have enough doses to vaccinate 4 million people a day by the end of March. That's up from about 1.5 million shots a day right now. So what is the White House doing to prepare and to make sure they can hit that 4 million target?
The Biden administration has been increasingly taking control of more and more vaccine doses so they can allocate them in the way that they best see fit. Now, under the Trump administration, we all probably remember the strategy was just to send the vaccine doses to the states and let the states determine how to allocate them, how best to get them in people's arms. The Biden administration has now been sending vaccines directly to pharmacies, directly to community health centers that service low-income populations, and starting to open more and more of these mass vaccination centers, like you heard Andy Slavitt talking about just there a moment ago. Here's a little bit more of what he said the administration's doing.
Thanks to the incredible work of FEMA, the Department of Defense, and colleagues across the government, since January 20, the Biden-Harris administration has already supported the establishment or expansion of 441 community vaccination centers across 37 states, territories, and the District of Columbia.
And most of these federally run centers and the retail pharmacies that the federal government is sending the vaccine directly to are targeted primarily at those groups that have been hardest hit by the pandemic. So Black communities, Latino communities, low income communities, to try and get more equitable distribution of the vaccine. But like you noted, Allison, in the introduction there, we're going to have a major surge in influx of vaccines. We could go to about 4 million from 1.5 million, more than a doubling. So they're going to have to really ramp things up, even though they've already been ramping things up over the next 4 weeks to be able to meet the demand. To meet the production that is coming from the manufacturers.
Shannon, the president prioritizing getting shots to Black, Latino, and low-income communities, using pharmacies to make that happen. But what's a specific plan to connect people with those pharmacies and the appointments they need to get those shots?
Right. And that's an issue that the administration has said it is a problem, especially in communities where they might not have access to the internet. So they are trying to reach out to community leaders, to faith leaders, to the people who are in direct contact with the folks in the communities that they are trying to reach. But for the more general population, and this is pretty quickly, as you can see from those numbers, going to be getting into the broader, wider population in the coming months. There's a few approaches they're looking at. One is a website called vaccinefinder.org. If you go there now, your state probably not included. And if your state is included in it, you're probably just going to see a lot of out of stock or no appointments available. But the idea behind this website is to be a one-stop shop portal for people to go to, put in their zip code, and be able to search and find, every pharmacy, grocery store, mass vaccination site in their community and see which have doses available, which have appointments available, and have a better idea of where to go to, rather than basically calling around to every pharmacy you can think of and asking if they have any doses, which is what many people are having to do right now.
Oh, so many people doing that right now. We just keep hearing horror story after horror story. Shannon, Germany has more than 1 million unused COVID vaccines that are just sitting in storage, partly because people are reluctant to take them. Now, we don't have this issue in the U.S. right now, but what's the administration doing to prevent that from happening here when we have many more doses available?
And administration officials and public health officials do see that as an issue we are going to face in the coming months. As hard as it is to imagine right now, when you see the lack of supply for all the people who want it out there, we are probably only a few months away from being to the point where the supply is exceeding the demand. And there's a big communications messaging underway, and a lot of things the administration is thinking about doing to encourage people and get over that vaccine hesitancy.
All right, Shannon Pettypiece, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Walmart stepping up to help vaccinate small-town America, the nation's largest retailer, saying it can vaccinate millions of people a month and will focus on rural and underserved areas. NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk spoke to Walmart's CEO about how they're trying to increase access and how else the biggest box store in the world can help in the fight against COVID.
Hey there, Allison. Here's a fact you may not know. 90% of Americans live within 10 miles of a Walmart, and a lot of those stores have pharmacies that are ready to start vaccinating people. Some have started, but the CEO, John Furner, tells me they are ready to do a lot more. 13 million. That's how many people Walmart is capable of vaccinating a month, according to U.S. President and CEO John Furner. The nation's largest retailer isn't quite there yet, but they are ramping up. You are in 35 states, over 1,400 stores. Are you getting the supply that you need to operate in all those places?
The supply is getting better. We think we can do up to 13 million doses a month. We've already given about 500,000 just in the last few weeks, and we think we can get to, a really big number.
You've said that you're focusing on underserviced areas. What does that mean, and how do you select those areas?
We're in 5,000 communities with a facility of some type. And so our team, along with the CDC, they've been looking at all sorts of data. We have a supply chain and we have a team of people who are in a lot of places in the country. There may not be other options for them to get a vaccine. So we can play a really important role for communities that may not have just an easy path to find someone that can help them get a vaccine administered.
For a lot of people, John, trying to get an appointment for a vaccine has been a nightmare, to say the least. How can you keep Walmart from being another place on the list where there are supposed to be appointments, but no one can seem to get them?
Yeah, great question. I'm really proud of we've got a product management and technology team, and they've been working around the clock for weeks to get a scheduling system put together. And they did this in a way that's really user friendly. So you can sign up at walmart.com, or you can go on the app, provided that you're eligible. Then if there is supply and we've got the ability to get you the shot, then we'll get it set up and do that.
Is Walmart doing anything to address some of the doubts or questions that people might have still about this vaccine to convince them to take part in the program?
We've been educating our own associates and using media channels to explain the benefits of vaccines. And we also think that it's important that that friends or family or peers or others that have gotten the vaccine are open about it. I mean, my intention is to get the vaccine when it's my turn. It's not my turn yet, but when it is my turn, I intend to do so.
How about among your employees? Are they getting vaccinated? I mean, they are on the front lines as much as anyone else these days.
We hope they do, and we're encouraging them to do that. There will I'm sure people that will decide to do this, and there may be some that decide not to, and hopefully we can get them the right information so they decide it's the right thing to do. But we are leaving it, of course, to our associates to make their own decisions.
Walmart says as the vaccine supply grows, they hope to expand vaccination sites to all 50 states. The company's success, Furner says, will rest on the strong relationship between pharmacists and the customers they serve.
Many of us know our pharmacists. We know our pharmacists by name. We ask our pharmacists advice, and they love doing that. That's what they went to school for, and that's the reason they got into this, is to make a difference in health outcomes and help people with their health all across their lives.
Walmart wants to expand its vaccination efforts outside of their stores, even going into churches and civic centers, other places in the community, just to give people as much access as possible. Allison.
Cheating the system with a 7-digit code. In California, some ineligible people are cutting the line for the COVID vaccine. NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce did some digging to see how that's possible.
I'm not over 65. I'm not a healthcare worker or first responder. There's no way I can get the vaccine in California right now. At least, that's what I thought. Until this website, myturn.ca.gov, told me I am eligible, and all it took was a 7-digit code. The person who gave me the code works in TV and film in LA. They got it from industry colleagues, and they're not eligible either. The codes are supposed to reach marginalized groups, like the ones Jim Mangia serves at St. John's in South LA.
We're noticing a lot of people that don't qualify for the vaccine at this time, mostly young, white hipsters from the West Side who are taking up all the appointments really quickly as soon as we open up the links. And they are crowding out seniors of color, low-income communities from getting the vaccine.
We weren't able to get a state official on camera, but the Governor's Office of Emergency Services did provide this statement. These codes are for use by impacted communities, and if these codes are improperly used by those not in these groups, appointments will be canceled to make sure the appointment slots go to those who need them most. In this case, a nonprofit we were working with shared it with the community it serves, and a member of that community shared it more widely.
Is it an aha or is it a no duh moment, honestly, when we think about this?
Louise McCarthy is the president of the Community Clinic Association of Los Angeles County. She thinks this could have been avoided if the state asked community clinics for insight.
It's not new that there are people who are happy to jump to the front of the line. That's not news to us. What's really critical is the health centers know the communities they serve. Talking about seniors over 65, a link is not going to get them access. What gets them access is a human being on the phone talking them through and making the appointment on their behalf. And that's what community-based organizations and community clinics and health centers do.
Now, local health centers like St. John's are tasked with not just administering doses, but policing the system too.
Yeah, we send them emails and we ask them if they qualify in the tier. And I have to say, most people are honest about that. But that's another level, another layer of follow-up.
Do you have any idea how many people may have been able to get the vaccine through your center, even though they weren't eligible?
90% of the folks we've given vaccine to are people of color. So clearly, our patients, the systems that the workaround systems we've created are allowing our patients to get in and allowing the community of South LA to get in. But I would say that's probably about, 8 to 10% on any given day that you kind of like, I don't think they're a health worker and they certainly don't live in South LA, but they got through.
In all honesty, I did not make a vaccine appointment through this website, and I checked back a few days later to find that the code that I was using no longer worked. The state says that they've canceled all appointments made with these runaway codes and that they'll continue to monitor the situation going forward. When we reached out to the state to ask if there were any repercussions for improperly using the code and if anybody has been punished for doing so, we didn't hear back.
We need vaccines that are effective and well tolerated, and importantly, ones that are simple to deploy. Vaccines are our primary weapon in countering and controlling this threat. With the data on hand, we now see that the Janssen vaccine candidate checks nearly all the boxes.
The Johnson & Johnson vaccine checks all the boxes. That's straight from the VRBPAC meeting on the J&J shot today. That panel unanimously endorsing the vaccine. If the FDA grants emergency use authorization, which could happen this weekend, this shot will be the third in our arsenal against COVID-19. Public health physician Dr. Chris Purnell joins me now. She also participated in Moderna's vaccine trial. Dr. Purnell, Americans could start getting the Johnson & Johnson shot next week. What should people know about this single-dose vaccine?
I think what's most important for people to know, Allison, is that it's very good at preventing severe disease, meaning it's good at preventing hospitalizations, meaning it's good at preventing intensive care use, and it's good at preventing death. And because it has a longer refrigerator shelf life, we'll be able to use these vaccines in more mobile locations. Shipping it will not be as much of a challenge as has been with the mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer one in particular. So this is good. We're adding another tool to the tool chest.
We've been covering barriers to vaccine access for Black and Latino Americans, including confidence in the COVID vaccine. Could a single dose shot help with that at all?
It could, right? So what I've been explaining to people is that those who are in the wait and see category, which you find a lot in Black and brown groups as evidence in polling data, they're looking for key indicators. They're looking for indicators that the vaccine will keep them safe and they won't get sick, and that they'll have long-term immunity. Some of those questions we already have answers to, and some we don't around long-term immunity. But if a person is on the teeter-totter edge of motivation versus intention and actually taking the action, knowing that one shot would be available to them and that they would have the pretty much the same level of effectiveness of preventing severe disease, I think it could help people make that choice or decision. Bottom line, we're going to have to talk about the science in very plain spoken terms. Bottom line, we're going to have to think through those things that are barriers to access. So those challenges don't necessarily go away, but this is cause for guarded optimism.
More news out of the VRBPAC meeting. A CDC official saying variants are probably more common than we thought. Take a listen.
These variants are probably much more widespread throughout the country. And I think we have to assume, in the absence of other information, that these variants probably could exist throughout the entire United States.
Health officials like Dr. Fauci have said that vaccines are the way to stop new variants from emerging. How do you think, how helpful will a third vaccine be here in this fight against new and emerging variants?
The third vaccine will be helpful because we'll be getting more people safe and we'll be keeping them safe. But bottom line, I want to emphasize to people, the virus needs a host to replicate. So if we're all doing those baseline public health measures like practicing frequent hand hygiene, wearing our mask in all situations outside of our household, practicing physical distancing, and avoiding crowded, cramped indoor spaces, that's going to do a lot to stop the spread of the variants. Unfortunately, in the United States, we've been slower than our peers around sequencing and doing surveillance for variants. So what we don't know has hurt us in a way. But now we're gearing up to be more informed, and having that information will be useful. But just knowing it doesn't stop the virus itself. It's the actions, it's the behaviors, and we need to do all of those I just mentioned.
CDC Director Rochelle Walensky saying this virus is not yet done with us. Here she is.
Things are tenuous. Now is not the time to relax restrictions. We may be done with the virus, but clearly the virus is not done with us. We cannot get comfortable or give in to a false sense of security that the worst of the pandemic is behind us.
Dr. Purnell, what's your advice for viewers who are waiting to get their vaccine?
My advice to people who are still waiting is that you don't need to wait. Let's get answers to your questions. Let's quell your fears and concerns. Let's get you the information so that you can have a movement along that decision journey. Waiting only puts a person at increased risk. And I have this conversation daily, Allison. I have this conversation in community every day, whether it's through virtual means, a text or a phone call, or a senior here in my home, in my building here in Montclair. It's so important that people understand that they don't have to wait if they're already eligible. And for those who are yet eligible, I want them to get in the position to be ready to make a decision when their time comes. And we have to do our part in public health. So we have to keep speaking about the science and the data, and we have to keep working through those access barriers.
Dr. Purnell, it is always great to have you on. Thank you for all of your wonderful medical advice. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Twitter experimenting with a new subscription option called Super Follows. It lets people charge money for additional exclusive content. A big change for the platform. NBC News senior media reporter Dylan Byers joins us now. All right, so Dylan, how does Super Follows work?
So it works like this, Allison. Effectively, if you are a creator, an influencer, an expert in your field, and you have commanded a following, you can start to charge members of that following for more access to exclusive content. And that could work in all manner of ways. Let's say you're a musician who wants to give super fans early access to some of your music. You could do it that way. Let's say you follow the stock market and feel like you have advice or tips or early breaks on how a stock is going to go, and you want to charge your followers for that. There are myriad ways in which you could see this working. And you can implement any sort of subscription fee you want. You could charge people 50 cents, $1 per tweet, or you could charge them far more, depending on what you think you can command from that audience.
So, Dylan, Twitter, like a lot of social media platforms, depends on ad revenue. What's pushing this shift?
Yeah, Twitter depends on ad revenue more than most, and yet they don't draw the same kind of advertising revenue that a behemoth like Facebook or Google does. And so they need to diversify. And so what Twitter has said in a statement to us is they're sort of re-examining and rethinking the incentives that they give users in terms of how their business model works. And if you introduce a subscription service, you can start to diversify that revenue stream if you're Twitter, because you're skimming a little bit off the top of everybody's subscription. It's not much. It's just 5%. But if enough people use this super follows feature, that begins to become a potentially lucrative business for Twitter itself.
So, Dylan, have other social media companies tried this before? Has it worked? I'm not someone who's in a position to capitalize on super following, so I wouldn't have been part of it anywhere else, hence the question.
Yeah, I mean, they have, and it's actually what we're seeing is a shift towards more of these subscription-based services where the user, him or herself, gets to create their own subscription business. And the reason for that is because you've basically got people who have generated these followings and are looking for ways to make a business out of them. And so you're seeing this shift away from purely advertising reliant models to models that basically give the creator incentives to stay on the platform. If you're a Twitter user who has a huge following and there are other social media companies that you're competing with, you will stay on Twitter if you think you can make money there. And yes, other people are doing it. There are newsletter businesses that are doing it. Clubhouse, the sort of latest hot social media app, will eventually something like tipping or subscriptions or even tickets where you could sell tickets in order to gain entry into a room where people are having a conversation. This is a trend we're going to see across the board. And I believe we're going to be seeing it at places as big as Facebook and Google as well.
Wow. Dylan, you always know so much more about social media than I could ever hope to. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.